think of modern Indian painters and her name is amongst the first to come to mind. Attend an auction and her paintings are amongst the first to sell. She's liked by the critics, she's loved by art lovers, and she's a favorite of the fashionable set. But what sort of person lies behind the artist, and how does she regard her work? To find out, keep watching as I talk to Anjolie Ela Menon. Anjolie, you've had perhaps more acclaim than most other Indian artists. Is this recognition a source of satisfaction, or is it irrelevant to you as an artist?
Well, it's been a source of surprise. I never could imagine. I wasn't particularly ambitious. I certainly didn't want to become well-known or famous. I just wanted to paint. And so it continues to be a surprise, even to hear words like yours.
Okay, when you paint, who do you paint for? Yourself? For an audience?
Absolutely for myself. And finally, after many, many years, I have a studio of my own where I can go and be myself and paint only for myself.
So the painting world is your own inner sanctum?
Absolutely, yes.
But tell me something, this means that paintings, though exhibited publicly, remain actually a very private, personal expression.
Well, I've always said this. I've said that the act of painting is a completely personal and, I admit, a selfish one. I don't, that's why I don't believe in didactic art. I don't paint pictures for causes or ideas. It is completely a form of self-expression. It's done by myself, for myself. The fact that so many other things happen to a painting afterwards continues to baffle one and sometimes irritate one too. The fact that it's then framed, hung, bought, sold, criticized, interpreted in various ways, which is sometimes very far from where it was painted.
Okay, you say you paint for yourself, so let's try and understand you. Your father was a Bengali general, your mother had a Brahmo Samaj background, your grandmother was American Christian. Are you a child of two worlds?
I'm not only a child of two worlds, but I'm a child, a person of many worlds. And I think in this day and age, I'm very, very happy and glad about that. I think I'm terribly fortunate to have had both Western and Indian upbringing, with Western classical music and literature, as well as the Indian traditional background that my father was able to impart.
It sounds very privileged. Was it also a wealthy family?
No, we had no money at all.
So were you scratching around for a living? Was it precarious?
No, like all army families. We never heard about money, we never thought about money.
It wasn't a subject that was ever mentioned?
The life in the cantonment was so complete, you never needed any money.
Okay, you lost your mother when you were very young.
Very young, yes.
Was that traumatic?
Yes. That was very traumatic, but it also was a catalyst that I poured my grief of that time really into starting to paint. And it was a catalyst that made me decide not to be a doctor as my father wanted, and to want to be a painter.
Do you even suggest that if that hadn't happened, perhaps you might have ended up a doctor, not a painter?
I might have. But I was also encouraged very much and brought up thereafter by my two aunts. Tara Ali Beg was one of them, and I was very privileged to have been brought up by her and by my American grandmother.
How do you remember your American grandmother? Because she played quite a seminal role in your upbringing.
Yes, she did, especially since my mother died young. Well, she was just what I'm trying to be, a grandmother like that to my grandchildren too. Just to be there, to be very, very loving, to cook wonderful meals, and to provide that kind of stability. That,
she gave you the emotional backbone that losing a mother would otherwise have meant you wouldn't have had.
Yes.
Okay, you first began painting seriously at the age of 12 at Lovedale School.
Yes, I'd already started to paint, but I really painted very, very seriously, and outpourings of hundreds of paintings. I mean, the output at that time was amazing, just after my mother died, which was when I was just around 14.
You had a school art master, Sushil Mukherjee, who I believe was amongst the first to recognize and draw out your talent. How important was he looking back now?
He was very, very important. In fact, I've been very bereft because he died last year. And I'd kept up with him, though he migrated to America. I saw him many times, and he continued to be a source of inspiration.
Did he approve of the way Anjolie Ela Menon had developed from the age of 12 to the artist she is today?
Well, I think that he, like me, was a little bit surprised at the accolades and the so-called fame. And he always cautioned me about it. And he said, you know, you've got to keep the core of your creativity very, very pure and not get shaken by all this.
He remained a steadying influence in case the praise turned your head.
He did. It's not just turned my head, but he said that the praise is ephemeral. both praise and blame are ephemeral, but the work remains, and your work has got to continue to have quality. Don't ever get shaken by wanting to do quickies and so on. You know?
In the 1960s, you went to Paris and studied for 2 years at the École des Beaux-Arts. What was that like?
Well, I think it was very, very necessary experience in my life. More than what we did at the Beaux-Arts, it was an opening up of the mind, because when I left India, I'd already had 2 exhibitions. I'd already become the darling of Delhi and Bombay society, which was extremely bad for me at that age. I was about 18 and a half. I'd already had these exhibitions. Richard Bartholomew had written glowingly about me in Thought, and other critics had taken that up. When I went to Paris, the first thing was it was a big come down. I was just
you were nobody there.
I was nobody there, and the people, the other people who were there, also on scholarships, they were the creme de la creme of the brains of the world, and I found huge gaps in my knowledge. Certainly, the whole French side was missing. I hadn't read Proust. I just barely read Camus. I hadn't seen the great films. So I joined the Cinematheque with another friend, Alain.
I gather at one stage you saw as many as 90 films in a semester.
That's right. In one month.
90
because they used to
films in a
have
month.
3 films a day. And since we paid a lot, it was during our holidays, we'd really saved and saved on a very, it was a very stingy bourse that we used to get.
So you were absorbing Western culture like a sponge. You were taking it in.
Absolutely.
You
And
were
then we
greedy for
traveled.
knowledge.
This friend of mine, Shama Zaidi, Shama and I hitchhiked and backpacked throughout Europe, through the Middle East as well, which people had said was fraught with danger, but nothing ever happened.
So this was really the learning experience that made the Anjolie Menon of today.
It was a very great learning experience, and a lot of what I saw then, especially in Romanesque and Byzantine art, formed the sort of the visual bedrock of my whole, the genre which I then created.
Okay, you came back and married in December 1962 to Raja Menon. Can I describe him as a childhood sweetheart?
Yes, we were in Lovedale together. We were in
So from the age of 12 you decided Raja was going to be your man?
No, I hated him when I was 12. I hated him when I was 12. He used to spit little paper balls at the back of my head in class.
He was the big tease.
He was a big tease. But by the time I was 14, I think I was very sure I wanted
What
to
won
marry
you
him.
over?
I don't know. It was just a charisma. I think he was exceedingly intelligent, even then. And I still continue to think that he's the most intelligent man I know.
But your parents didn't share your admiration for him, did they? I gather they were trying very hard to put you off marrying him once upon a time.
Yes, my father did, yes. He said because he was such a young punk. And he was too young, really. He didn't really object to him. But in the end, my father doted on him. And that was nice.
Marriage to Raja, of course, also turned you into a naval officer's wife.
Yes.
How difficult was it to be a naval officer's wife and an artist at the same time?
Well, when I look back on it now, 30 years of moving 30 times, constantly...
There was no such thing as a permanent home.
There was no such thing as a permanent home. We were constant nomads. In a way, they were all great experiences. And I can't say I have any regrets. But it was difficult, and it grew increasingly more difficult as I grew older, to lead both lives. There's a little quote at the back of the book that was done on me, in which it said, and in this pandemonium, in the hinterland of this pandemonium, I live alone.
Your friends say that Anjolie Menon learned to become 2 different split personalities. On the one hand, there was the moody, introspective, melancholic painter. On the other, there was the gregarious, fun-loving mother and wife.
Yes, it had to be like that. But I find that it's more and more difficult now to play both roles.
So which one are you choosing now?
It's not a question of choosing. One has to, I think when one chose marriage, a lot of my friends who were in Paris said, marrying, I mean, how can you do a thing like marrying? It's such a prosaic thing to do. And how can you be a painter and marry? And you've got to stay on in Paris and lead the bohemian life. But the lure of Raja, just Raja as a person, was just too strong. Not marriage. And it happened that because he was in the services, I couldn't exactly choose to live with him.
So today, which would you call yourself? A painter, a mother, a wife?
A grandmother. A grandmother who paints.
A grandmother who paints.
No, but seriously, I do. I drag my grandchild along with me to my studio, and she and I paint together.
But what about earlier on, before you had grandchildren? How easy was it to find the space to paint?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult to find the space to paint. For many years, I didn't even have the physical space to paint, leave alone the mental or emotional space to paint. I just painted in a little corner of the house. It was always my corner that was swept aside when there was a guest.
How did you tell your husband and your children that this is my world, you can't walk into it?
Well, they did. I mean, you know, I never managed to tell them that. I haven't managed to convince them about that even till today. In fact, I was relating an amusing incident where I was painting this huge mural, which is now at the Indira Gandhi International Airport, and it was being painted on panels on the floor. And I came in the evening where the painting was drying and found these huge Nike marks all over it. Where my son had shown his pals that, look, my mother's painting this painting, and they walked right all over it.
So presumably some of the best of Anjolie Menon has been touched, perhaps deliberately, perhaps unintentionally, by her husband and children.
Absolutely. Not so much by my husband. I think he's a little more discreet about it. By the kids, certainly, if you ask them about my painting, I mean, they think that I've always painted, I've always lived with a spoon in one, a ladle in one hand and a brush in the other.
And today,
nothing changes.
And
today, but at least I have a hideaway now. I have a place to get away to. So when I'm there, they don't come.
But today, now that they've grown up and that they know that you're a very highly acclaimed painter, are they proud of Mummy?
I think you'll have to ask them that. I'm not sure.
Well, that's the point at which you're embarrassed.
You know, in Hindi we have this expression, "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar," which means that if you have a chicken at home, it's just like eating lentils. So I think it's a bit like that.
So they're not impressed by Mummy's acclaim at all?
I don't think so.
Okay, Anjolie, we're going to take a quick little break over there. I want to come back in part 2 and talk to you about your work and how you regard it. We'll be back in just a couple of moments. See you then. Welcome back to Face to Face. My guest is Anjolie Ela Menon. Anjolie, let's talk a little about your paintings. They say that an Anjolie Ela Menon work is unclassifiable, that you don't belong to any particular school of painting. Does that make you an individual, or does that make you a maverick?
Well, both really. Both.
You've often used the description maverick to describe yourself. Why do you choose that?
Because I seem to have always done the wrong thing at the wrong time, or maybe the right thing at the wrong time. When the whole world was going abstract, I continued to be resolutely figurative in my approach to art. When people were painting didactic paintings, mine continued to be very personal and perhaps a bit escapist. When everyone was coming back to figurative art, I had my first foray into abstraction.
But was this the way things simply turned out, or was this deliberate?
No, it was just the way things turned out, because I was not really very concerned with trends and schools and where I belonged. As I say, because I painted for myself.
So if there's a pattern in your paintings, it's one that happens to have crept in because you wanted it. It's not something deliberate. It's not something you were striving for.
It's always been like that. In fact, many of the paintings just make themselves as you're painting them. I don't necessarily approach the canvas with any preconceived notion of how it's going to turn out.
And yet there are certain distinct Anjolie Menon features that people notice. For instance, symbols such as the crow, the lizard, an empty chair, a kite. What do those mean?
Well, it's that I think as a woman painter particularly, one's world is very small. And one of the things that painters do, I think, or any artist or even writers do, is to take mundane, ordinary objects and by repetition, by recognizing them, by picking the crow from the windowsill onto the canvas, you are making a symbol out of him. What becomes a motif, by repetition then becomes a symbol. And for instance, the chair has been a very important object in my work, and to a certain extent the chair was symbolic, especially the empty chair. Again, denoting that someone had been there. My work's always been related to people. So the chair denoted someone who had been, perhaps gone away.
Let me ask you this. You said that you were a child of two worlds and that there's as much of you that's Indian as there is Western. Would you call your paintings particularly Indian?
Well, there was one phase. I don't think one can, especially when you've done 42 years of painting, you can't classify your paintings in one category. And there was certainly, my earlier work was very Westernized. It was sometimes criticized for being very Western. But certainly, since my marriage to Raja and my interaction with my in-laws in Kerala, a lot of Kerala themes have come into my work. in the last, I would say, 15 years.
And it's also true that in the early 80s, when your husband was posted in Germany and you went there with him, you found that you were unable to draw and paint in Germany. Your muse dried up, you said.
Completely. I mean, I used to sit there in front of this blank canvas for days on end. And finally I told Raja, I said, just give me a ticket. I want to go home.
What was the problem? Was Germany too comfortable to handle?
I just cannot understand what it was. And when the muse deserts you, it just deserts you. And that is the greatest despair for an artist.
And yet you stepped off the plane and you painted non-stop for a month on return to India.
Yes, I went to my friend Preeti's house, where I used to always keep canvases and paint under her bed. And I just came from the airport to her house at 3 in the morning and I started to paint. And I just didn't stop. I painted 20 paintings in a month.
So do you need the sights, smells, the traumas and troubles of India?
Well, traumas and troubles is putting it a little...
But sights and smells?
It's just that this is home and I can't analyze why I need to be here. And I need also, I very much thrive in an urban setting. I'm not one for idyllic places away in the country, away from it all.
You said earlier on that your mother's death was a catalyst that propelled you into painting. Do you draw from pain? Do you draw from experience and suffering?
I don't think I draw from experience or suffering, but I think that anyone who lives in this country and is in the least bit sensitive, the experience, the suffering has to show itself or overlap into your work at some stage.
When I look at an Anjolie Menon painting, say of the 60s and 70s, the eyes are hooded, the colors are somber, and the image that comes to mind is one of melancholy, of introspection, and a certain deliberate holding back, as if there's a secret that the painter is retaining. Would you accept that?
Perhaps, yes.
And yet when you look at some of your more recent work, the eyes have opened, the colors are more vivid. Is that just a change in style of painting, or is that also reflective of a change in you, your personality?
Yeah, of course, I think it does always reflect one's personality and one's circumstances. One's circumstances change, and you go through periods of joy and happiness, and certainly by the time you come to my age, there is, and I have been very fulfilled. A great fulfillment in one's life, in one's aims, and in one's family, and the way one lives.
And so in a sense, would you say that your paintings, when seen as a whole, plot a sort of autobiography?
I haven't really thought of it as such, but perhaps, yes. There was a period where I was very, very lonely. And this was not because my world was not peopled. In fact, it coincided with the stage when my children were growing up and there was a lot going on. And Raja's continued to be very close and
what was
a
the
great
cause
friend.
of the loneliness? Did you suddenly feel that you didn't have a role in the family? The kids had grown up?
No,
your
it
husband
wasn't.
had a
It
job?
was even before the kids had grown up. It was just, I think there's a loneliness in one's inner quest and one's inner journey as a painter, which comes, sometimes you come to a dead end, sometimes you don't know where your work is going.
And that loneliness which you felt inside you, you expressed through your paintings?
No, it's that the paintings are an expression of that loneliness. It's not that that your loneliness is assuaged by the fact of painting. I think that you always have to struggle alone. The struggle of the artist, no one can share. Not your friends, not your family, not your mentors, not your teachers, your gurus. If you've got to get there, you've got to struggle, you know.
If the struggle of an artist cannot be shared, then let me ask you this. Is an Anjolie Ela Menon painting simply a visual experience, or is it also something that has to be understood cerebrally? Do you need to understand it with the brain, or do you need to just admire it with the eyes?
Well, I hope that one goes beyond what somebody had described as a surface allure, because there's an alluring technique which over the years gets perfected, a sort of Renaissance hue, which is pleasing. But I think that in many phases of my work there's been an underlying hint of menace. There has been, as you have said, an underlying sorrow or grief, which has often been manifest. And that's difficult for people to just gloss over.
But
in fact, I think one of some of the most rewarding moments in my life as a painter have been when people have identified totally with some painting of mine. A woman who's come to the gallery and said, "That's my chair, that's me sitting in that chair." there has been a sense of identification with many of the people who see the paintings.
How often do you find people who come and actually understand from the painting what you were trying to express through it?
Very seldom what I was trying to express, but many people use the painting as a vehicle for their own expression. And that's rewarding too.
Because you helped draw out from them
Yes.
what they perhaps haven't been able to express for themselves.
Yes, that often happens when you read a good book.
But you then become a catalyst for their emotions.
Yes, yes, quite often.
But then isn't that unsatisfying for you? Because your paintings are an expression of something you're trying to say, and if people don't readily understand it, do you feel let
It doesn't
down?
matter to me, because the satisfaction for me is only in making the painting. And when that painting is made, for me, the experience is over, really. I know a lot of people feel that one is so interested in what happens to the painting afterwards.
Do you not care at all?
Not very much, not very much. Otherwise, I think I would have been much more careful with my documentation, much more careful about where my paintings went. I do try very consciously to achieve a certain detachment.
So each painting, when it's finished, is a chapter that's over.
It is, because only then you can go forward. You can't keep harking back to what you have
So
left
does it
behind.
not matter to you whether a painting has a good home, whether it fetches a good price?
Like a puppy. No, it doesn't matter.
And is parting with these works of art when you're finished with them because they're expressions of your soul, in a sense, difficult?
Yeah. It used to be very difficult when I was younger. I remember my father used to happily give away my paintings to all his pals. Say, oh, my daughter will paint some more, you can have this painting or that. So I find in some old general's house a very early painting hanging on his wall, all my father's old cronies. But I used to find that hard. But I grew out of it, and very deliberately. I think it's very important not to get attached.
All artists retain some of their paintings for themselves, but I've noticed from the book that's been done on you that some of the more striking have been kept at home.
A few have been kept.
So
that's my children more than me, who said, no, you're not going to part with that.
You don't have your own favorites?
I think you just get used to things that are on your wall. So to that extent, they become favorites.
And now that
they're more familiar than favorites.
And now that you're a grandmother, you've achieved a terrific renown in India and abroad as a painter. What's the next ambition? What's the next goal?
Well, sometimes I just long for some ordinariness. I really do.
What does ordinariness mean to you?
To not be in the public eye, to not have one's paintings on the market, just to be left alone.
You want to be other than yourself?
Yes. No, to just be myself.
To be yourself?
Yes.
Without someone pointing it out to you all the time?
Yes.
Anjolie Ela Menon, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye.